Not everything in this world can be explained. So tonight, we delve into the realm of the supernatural. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Number 1. A lot of weird shit happened to my cousin. Lots of ghostly stuff. Stuff I've been a part of. But this story happened when he was a kid, around the age of 12. He was dating this girl from school. His parents were friends with hers, and they visited each other a lot because of that. And it was this small town where everybody knew everybody. My mum was a teacher. His mum was an assistant. One day, she disappears. Not just her, but her entire family. They didn't tell anyone they were moving, but they were gone. As for what I know, she didn't say she was moving or anything, but she seemed sad, and she was never usually sad. I asked her why she was so sad, and she just shrugged. It was so perplexing and out of character. For my part, I just assumed she'd moved away. Normally when a student left, we were told beforehand, and there was some kind of going away party. I can't think of one time this didn't happen. Normally teachers forget their students are gone and say their names during roll call. This time, none of that. According to my cousin, when he asked his mum where she and her family went, his mum didn't even know who he was talking about. When he asked the teachers, they were acting baffled, as if they'd never even heard of her. Years later, he asked his mum again, and his mum remembered nothing. Nor did his dad, who often took him to see her. He did internet searches, he checked phone books, birth, death records, everything. Here's where it gets weirder, weirder, and weirder. My mom was friends with her parents too. I had been one of her best friends, and we spent a lot of time together in and out of school. My mum has a near photographic memory of every student she's ever had. She remembers friends she had 30 and 40 years ago. She had no memory of my friend or her family. None. My cousin and I were pretty freaked out, so we started asking around, beginning with all our old friends from school, and not one of them remember. I've seen and experienced a lot of weird shit, from the dope ghost to a UFO, to maybe Bigfoot, and everything in between. This one is still the one that freaks me out the most. There are things that you don't see every day. There's an entire affluent and popular family with popular cheerleading child that disappears, and no one remembers her except from 2 people allegedly. If it weren't for everyone's Men in Black style amnesia, I'd think witness protection. But holy shit, no one remembers. And we've asked everyone we knew. Number 2. The campus on which my building is located is the old Massillon State Hospital. The Massillon State Hospital was, for lack of a better term, the insane asylum. We have 3 of the old buildings. 2 are still occupied, and 1 is empty. The entire empty building is McKinley Hall. The campus is private property, and we have and will prosecute trespassers due to safety concerns and privacy laws. Well, onto the story. One night, I notice a rustling near the building while I'm doing ground checks. I radio my co-worker and tell him what I saw. He responds. I grab my flashlight and we walk over to the building. It's around 10 p.m, so it's pretty dark. We figured someone had probably broken into McKinley Hall again. As in, we're telling people to leave and escorting them out probably 5 out of 7 days a week. Unless it's September or October, then it's 5 or 6 times a day. Anyway, we creep over to the building and light up the doorway. Sure enough, the door is open. It had been chained and locked. It no longer was, and there was no sign of the lock nor chain. So we creep into the building and are making sure to stay right next to each other because it's dark and it's creepy, and I'm not about to be something's snack. We clear the basement, the ground floor and the second floor. Nothing but some rats and a whole lot of dust and broken shit. The third floor is where it gets a little hinky. We start at one end and work towards the other side. It's dark, it's creepy, and I do not want to be there. Suddenly, it gets cold as shit. Now, we've all seen those movies, and we've seen enough to know that as soon as it gets cold, it's time to go. But we have to finish securing the building. As we're walking towards the other end of the hall, we see someone. I call out, tell them to leave, and they keep walking towards us. My co-worker calls out, tells them to leave, and they keep walking towards us. We stop this time and yell for them to go. By this point, I decided to use my incredibly bright flashlight to light them up and at least disorient them with the beam. The person is probably 6 feet away by this point. So I flick my light up, and it's not a person. All we see is the distorted face of what may have one point been a human, and we're losing our shit. I chuck my radio at it, and the radio passes through its head, and it screams, this deathly piercing scream that can only be made by the unholy spawn of hell itself, or it would seem so to be. So we turn and run, screaming like small children. It chases us, screaming the whole time, and we barrel down the stairs through the other floors, which are dark as hell and ungodly cold, and finally slam through the now closed door that we had left open. As we're running across the campus, I hear my co-worker holler at me, and he all but shoves me through the other door to one of the other occupied buildings. So here we are on the floor of a building, having tripped over each other trying to get in. He has a handprint on his upper arm and long scratches down his forearm. And apparently, it looked like something tried to suck my soul out. We went back the following day to retrieve the radio, and there was absolutely no trace of us having been there that day before. Where there should have been, there was no footprints, nothing. However, on the wall, there was writing that had not been there. It read, "What did you do to me?" And I haven't been back since. Growing up, my grandparents had this big, grey, German Shepherd called Max. He was a super sweet dog, but my grandparents kept him chained up in the yard, and I can't recall anyone ever interacting with him, except us kids. When we stayed at our grandparents', I remember bringing leftovers to Max and leaving them in his bowl. My sister and cousins remember this as well. Eventually, my family moved a couple of hours from my grandparents, and we saw less and less of Max. He was an old dog to begin with, but I recall he started developing tumors around his neck. Then one day, he was gone. I brought up Max to my dad years later as a teenager, wondering what exactly he died of. We had a dog that had died recently, and his tumors reminded me of the ones that Max had. My dad seemed really confused that I knew who Max was. He said Max had died of cancer, but that he was my dad's first dog, which I was confused by, since he mentioned a dog named Boots when he was a kid. He said that Boots was the dog his parents bought to replace Max, who died when he was 9. I was sure he had gotten mixed up or misremembered the dog. And here is where the story gets even weirder. My cousin and my sister all remember this dog. I could swear he was dead by then, but even my youngest cousin remembers Max. And here is where it gets insane. Where Max was chained up was a concrete platform. When, we thought, he died, my grandparents put a tool shed there, further lending to the confusion. There are pictures of me and my cousins, near my age, as I am the oldest grandchild, but my youngest cousins are 12 years younger, playing with the shed in the background. The fact that my cousins remember the dog makes no sense on that basis alone. That's not the insane part about the shed though. When I was a teenager, around 18 or 19, I helped my dad and my uncles tear down the ugly shed. On the concrete platform, right on the edge, was a child's handprint with my dad's name written underneath and a big German Shepherd-sized paw print. Underneath the paw print, in the same handwriting, was the name Max. To this day, none of us know why we all remembered this dog. I was born in the late 80s, and this dog died in 1969. Number 4. One afternoon, I was out riding alone when a pheasant spooked my horse. I was taken by surprise, and before I could correct myself, I was thrown into and tumbled over a dry stone wall. I smashed my head a bit and blacked out, as far as I could tell. I woke up and tried to move. My horse was free, and if he ran, I'd be devastated, and also about 10 miles from home, without any alternative but walking back. Now this is where things get pretty bizarre. I heard someone. "Don't move yet, Gary. I've got him, and I've got you too. You're safe. I'm here." It was a man's voice, and I was alone, in the middle of nowhere. Whoever had spoken knew my name, and despite the apparent attempt to calm me, I tried to move, a mistake, as my nose began to bleed and I passed out. I woke up and I was back on the correct side of the wall. My phone was on the ground lying next to me, smashed irreparably. My horse was tethered to the wall by his reins, his saddle placed on the ground near me. My head was pounding, but I didn't have any other choice but to tack up and get home, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined the voice and done it all myself. Climbed the wall, tied the horse, and laid myself down. As I got on the idiot beast, I began to feel like I was being watched, so I turned the horse this way and that way. But I was alone in that high-up field in the middle of nowhere, so I rode, covering the 10 miles in about 35 minutes. A hard ride, but I was injured, and, well, the idiot beast threw me off. He was very sorry about it. I know, because he was being particularly well behaved, and seeing as I've had him since he were a baby, I know these things. The whole way I felt as if I were being followed. Not possible, because unless they had a vehicle or a horse, no one could have kept up with me. I knew the woods and the heath up there like the back of my hand, and it just wasn't possible. I took a few shortcuts jumping walls and fences, risking the angrier farmer or two, but cutting off a few 100 yards of riding. Yet, whilst a bit of me was panicking at the feeling, for the most part, I kind of felt protected. That voice had been so kind-sounding, and anyway, that didn't matter because I'd imagined it, right? As my home appeared in the line of sight, I was walking down the road to cool the horse of 1,000 fall-downs. Through the sound of my horse's hoofs, I suddenly heard a human running, like office shoes on tarmac. It slowed down to a walk as my horse skidded forward, reacting to the sound behind it. I went to turn into the saddle when I heard it. "Don't turn around. You're safe now, you're home." And I've already done. No matter. I cleaned up your face, but that cut on your head is nasty, so best get it checked out, alright? I got the horse under control in a moment and turned, but there wasn't anyone there. No one could have been hidden so quickly, not without Beast hearing them or diving into the hedge undergrowth making a lot of noise. If they'd run off, I would have been able to see them running. I just went into the yard, sorted the house out in a daze, and went into the house. No one was home, so I went into the bathroom to look in the mirror to inspect the damage. The blood from my nose was wiped up. I could see the marks of the smudges, like wiping with a tissue. The cut was on my forehead, and I still have a dent. I ended up going to A&E for the forehead gash when my family got home. The doctor said something when I explained the events, without including me hearing disembodied voices, and it really stuck with me. He said, "You're very lucky to have managed to get yourself home like you did. Some people would be thanking whoever it was that was looking out for you that day." This was the first time I heard that voice. There was another occasion where I also heard this same disembodied voice. A few years later, after the horse incident, I became very ill, so I don't remember about a month's worth of my life. The medicines they put me on, coupled with the illness, wiped my hard drive somewhat. I do remember something though, as clearly as though it had happened earlier today. I dreamt of being sat up on a wardrobe, looking down at myself. I looked awful. I remember thinking, why do I look like that? You look very sick. You've been ill, but not like this. You gave me and everyone that knows you quite the fright. I had the impression of someone sitting next to me on the top of the wardrobe, but I didn't look at them. It was a man's voice, but I couldn't guess the age or anything. I said something about not wanting to be ill, and there was a sigh from my companion. I don't want you here either, but it's the only place you'll get better. The voice went quiet for a moment. I remember the whir and the bleep of the machines. Hey, I shouldn't do this, but there's a pen up here, a red pen. You're sat on it. I recall just going with this like it wasn't completely random. When you wake up, mention it. Tell them there's a red pen up here. Some daft idiot didn't put the cap back on. At that, I best go. I shouldn't really encourage this stuff, but the faces people will make are priceless. Get back down there. The machines will notice you're gone soon. And then the dream ended. When I was woken up, when I could speak again a day later, I mentioned the pen. No one was tall enough to reach the top of the wardrobe, so they found a taller nurse who went and ran his fingers along the tip that ran above the doors. The nurse produced a red pen. Cap on the wrong end. I went into that room unconscious, and at bed height, I couldn't have seen the top of the wardrobe. Sometimes I think I'd like a normal life, but to be fair, I wouldn't have any stories like these to share now, would I? My final story is about my stepfather's old house. It was odd. It's a grade 2 listed property, and the main part of the house was built in the late 1600s. It had rough walls and strange little holes that led to nowhere. Character, you say, Mrs. Estate Agent. The first thing I noticed in this house was my belongings would go missing. Hairbrushes, belts, my phone. I would, only half jokingly, ask the fairies and spirits to give them back. Always the items returned, but never where they'd been left. One day I was left alone and thought I would do an experiment. It was going to be the first night I'd actually slept there, and I was interested in discovering what was happening to my stuff. Maybe I was being a scatterbrain, so I left my phone in the middle of my bed. The window was right against my bed, and only an inch or two higher than my bed. I took the animals and headed into the garden. It was a nice day. Before my family came back, I went into the house to see where my phone was. I trotted up the stairs, fully believing it would be exactly where I had left it. No, I was wrong. The phone was in the windowsill, balanced on its bottom edge, and placed in the corner where the wall met the glass. The hairbrush I knew I'd left on the desk was now sitting atop the lampshade, and my eye patches were hung from the curtain rail. Everything felt disturbed, but not nasty, just playful. That night, I got into bed. Across the room was my sister, already half asleep, and about as sensitive to this weirdness as a baked potato. I was pulling down my patches when I noticed him. A man stood at the end of my bed with the smell of horsehair. A smell I know so well as a lifelong horse owner. I'd just gotten under the covers. The mattress was still cool. I wasn't asleep, and I knew that I was fully conscious. I just pulled them down the whole way lifted a good old two-fingered salute at the end of the bed, and whispered, "Leave me be, I'm trying to sleep." And I slept. The next day, I was getting dressed when I heard my name being called. I headed down the stairs to the living room, where my mum was sat on the sofa. "Did you?" "No, I heard it though." "Oh, Mum, what do I do? Why don't you tell it to—" And at that moment, it called my name again. So I shouted for it to go away, and the muttering stopped for a moment before picking up even more. So help me, I will not have disembodied voices taunting my children. Out with you! She jumped off the sofa and went into the kitchen. It went quiet again, and stayed that way. Anyone would, met with my angry mother. We left that house behind soon after, as our stepdad moved in with us. A good few more things happened. Dogs barking at no one, more names being said, and a very old coin just dropping from the ceiling, loud bangings from the attic, crawl space, etc. But they're all just similar to this. What was he or it? Why move my stuff? Did the people that live there know about it? And why did I have the overwhelming impression that his name was Nathaniel? Number 5. My aunt's house is haunted. She moved there when my cousin was around 2. She knew it was haunted instantly, but stayed because the ghosts were not malicious. My cousin, who is now 30, grew up there knowing it was haunted, as well as my 2 younger cousins. They talked about it so nonchalant-like, it was just part of their daily routine. I'm way into spooky stuff, so hearing this time and time again at family functions, I asked to spend the night, specially to try and listen for ghosts. Here is exactly what happened that night that was so strange. My cousin, my aunt, and my aunt's friend are watching Carrie. It's wintertime, and all week their fireplace was not working. My cousin says out loud, "When is this movie going to get scary?" Just then, the glass patio door in the kitchen opens. After the movie, we go get into the hot tub because we're cold, and after a while in there, we come back inside and the fireplace is blasting full heat out of it. My aunt laughs it off as the ghost's just messing with us, as apparently they play pranks like that a lot. After everyone is asleep, I am on the couch, and my cousin is on the floor next to me. I hear from the basement footsteps coming up the stairs. The basement door is very visible from where I'm laying, and I hear the steps come all the way up to the top. I am terrified and expect someone to come out the door, but nothing. A moment passes and the steps go back downstairs. This starts to repeat up and down the stairs. I wake up my cousin terrified. I say, "Listen, listen, it's crystal clear that a person is walking up and down the stairs there." And he looks at me like, "Dude, that happens every night. Go back to sleep." It went on for about 30 minutes, and I was mortified. I have more stories from my aunt, but that was the one experience that I had. I also have on other occasions there seen the lights turn on and off and heard more footsteps. She thinks it's children. They live across the street from a school that has also had reported strange activity. Number 6. I went to New York for work in the year 2006. We got finished early one day, and a few of us wanted to go to Ground Zero, and look around, since none of us had been to New York before. We had around 3 hours before we were supposed to be at a company dinner, so we figured we head down and walk around, and then come back and have plenty of time to shower and get ready for dinner. There were 4 of us that went. We all were checking the time before getting on the subway to make sure we had plenty of time. So we take the ride and get down there and take a walk around. They had some pictures and signs up there, but no museum or anything. It was very eerie and quiet, even with the traffic and bustle around. We all felt that way, a strange energy. We weren't there long before someone from our group said that we needed to hurry and get back because we'd been gone nearly 2 hours. That was impossible, I thought. We just got here a short time ago. We started panicking because there was no way we'd have had the time to get back in the subway, shower, and arrive for dinner. And we were meeting with our parent companies, so we had to be extremely presentable. We all looked at our phones, watches, etc., and sure enough, we had been gone way longer than we thought. So we practically ran back to the subway station, trying to figure out how we were going to clean up so quickly. We hopped on the subway and all sat there dumbfounded at how time could have gone by. Partway through our ride, I looked at my phone clock. It was set back an hour earlier than what I had just seen at ground zero. Wait a second. So I showed them all, and I knew I had seen a different time because I had checked over and over, not believing we'd gone over that long. So I told them my time was off and asked them to check their watches. We were back, all on the same time now, with over 2 hours until dinner. What the hell? All 4 of our clocks and watches had jumped an hour ahead whilst we were at ground zero, and we sat there in complete shock for the rest of the ride. My co-workers ranged in ages from 42 to 66, so this wasn't a prank that someone was trying to pull over us. It gave us all chills, and we could never explain what happened. We were telling the story at dinner, and someone said they had the same strange experience down in the area of New York recently as well. Very creepy. Number 7. When I was in high school, my uncle would throw me a couple of bucks to help babysit his kids with my aunt. They lived in a 2-story house by the water. It was a nice area, and the kids were around 3 and 6 respectively. One day, I was sitting in their den on my phone when I started to hear a baby crying. Thinking it was the 3-year-old, I headed to the bottom of the stairs to check and see if my aunt was there dealing with it. I called for her a couple of times and got no response. The baby kept crying. I called for her one more time, and when I got no response, I started walking up the stairs. Then I heard my cousins and aunt playing outside. All the hairs on my body stood still, and I literally felt a chill run down my spine. I quietly turned around, walked down the stairs and got into my car, and drove away. The baby was still crying when I closed the door behind me. A few years later, I was drunk at a family party, and my uncle told me this story. He told me that he and his wife used to hear the baby too, and apparently the previous owners had a kid die of SIDS in the room upstairs. He's an uber Catholic and had a mass said for the baby. He said after that, it never happened again. Still gives me the willies when I talk about it though. Number 8. When I was around 10 years old, I had this super messed up dream. It started out with me in my house, alone during the day. It's a small house, several minutes walk to the closest neighbor, and more or less surrounded by woods. I heard something coming down the driveway, like tires crunching in the gravel, but much slower. I went out on the porch to investigate, and I saw an old-fashioned covered wagon being pulled down the driveway. For some reason, this filled me with dread, and I ran back inside to lock all the doors. Once that it was done, I walked down the staircase into the basement, where I knew I could see him from the window built into the door. The wagon stopped moving once I was watching, and the man climbed down from the seat and stood in front of it. He was dressed in a black suit, with a black top hat, and he was looking right at me through the glass window. Once he was sure I saw him, he walked to the back of the wagon and pulled the covers off. There were people hanging from the supports of the top of the wagon, feet dangling, ropes around their necks. They looked dead, but the man in the top hat did something and their heads started inflating. It got to the point where it looked almost cartoonish. Eyes bulging out, red faces, the works. He kept looking at me while he did it, and I just knew he was going to do the same thing to me. I woke up absolutely terrified, and to make things 1,000 times worse, the power was out, meaning it took me a ridiculous amount of time to make my way into my parents' room and camp out on their floor. Here's the creepy bit. I've never told anyone about this particular dream because it was so bloody weird. Maybe 2 years ago, my family and I got into a conversation about the freakiest dreams that we'd ever had. I figured, what the hell? It's been 10 years. I can probably bring it up without hyperventilating. So I start telling the story, leaving out a lot of details for brevity's sake. And when I get to the part about the wagon coming down the driveway, my younger sister gets the weirdest look on her face and says, "Was the man wearing a top hat?" We quizzed each other, and we remembered most of the details in the same way. I can't quite figure out how we both had the same dream, because I distinctly remember not sharing it with anyone, because I thought it was just too strange. I still get freaked out when I think about it, and to date, it's probably the strangest and scariest dream that I have ever had. Number 9. My brother was helping me across the country. We borrowed a van and loaded everything up for the last trip. Just before we left, I checked my watch and called my girlfriend that we would be hitting the road soon. My brother checked the glitching clock, but only told me later that he did. We set out, but couldn't do more than 80 kilometers an hour because of the load. When we took the off-ramp off my new city, my brother told me he couldn't remember the trip. When I thought about it, neither could I. We both thought we were tired, and thought nothing of it. However, when we arrived at my new house, my girlfriend asked me if I broke the speed limit, because we were almost an hour early. When retracing the route, my brother and I both agreed that we can remember passing a certain gas station, and nothing thereafter until the off-ramp. To this day, we have no clue what happened during that hour that we're missing, or how we could have travelled that fast. Not with any car or van, at least. Now, at the beginning, I said that we both independently checked for time. This is important for us, because one time source could have been wrong but not both. I also called before we left, which limits the time we could use to travel. Since then, we have not experienced any weirdness like this. I don't have any weird memories or dreams, or pieces of metal lodged underneath my skin. Just an hour I lost. And for all of those of you wondering, no, it was not because of daylight savings. Number 10. Last year, I was staying in a hotel with my mother. One of the nights, as I was lying in bed, I noticed a human silhouette maybe 2 meters away from me. I figured it was just a shadow, so I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. I turned the light on, and obviously it disappeared. But when I shut the lights off again, it came back. I tried to convince myself that it was just a shadow, but trust me when I say there was nothing in that room that could have made me shadow like that. I looked around the room several times. It also occurred to me that the shadow wasn't there the previous nights, and nothing had been moved around, and it looked just like a human silhouette. I never believed in ghosts, but right then and there, I was terrified. I was too scared to look at it, so I turned around and eventually fell asleep. I told my mum about it the next morning, and she shrugged it off. She said I was just imagining things. Fair enough. That shadow wasn't there the next night, or the next. A few days after we'd gotten back home, my mum was doing something in the kitchen, and I was just sitting there studying. Without turning around, my mum said, "Do you remember that shadow of a person you saw at the hotel?" I said, "Yeah?" My mum just said, "I saw it too," and my blood turned to ice. My mum didn't want to admit that she saw it. I thought that she was sleeping, but it's because she didn't want to freak me out. I'm convinced that if ghosts exist, I saw one that night. My mum thinks it was the ghost of her best friend, who had committed suicide just a few days prior. Mum had spent hours earlier that evening writing her a long letter for some kind of closure. Maybe her best friend just wanted to say goodbye. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed these stories tonight. I had a lot of fun reading them and finding the stories for you guys. I also want to apologize that the video isn't an hour long. I know how much you guys enjoy the longer ones, but still this is fairly long. The thing is, I thought the 10 stories I'd have would be enough, but as it turns out, it's not. So I'm sorry. Tomorrow we should definitely be back to an hour long, with a really great set of stories. I also just want to remind you all that Creeks and Peaks and I are currently hosting a competition to win some exclusive signed artwork. If you'd like to find out more, you can find a link in the description, as well as at the end of my video, to my Valentine's special video, which outlines everything you need to know. So, if you'd like to enter, go check it out, and enter the competition, and good luck. If you enjoyed this video though, please remember to give it a big thumbs up, and consider subscribing for even more stories every day. Don't forget that if you would like me to read your story on my channel, feel free to send it to my email or share it to my Reddit, which is of course in the description. Just please make sure to include as much punctuation and descriptive language as possible, as this will maximize the chances of it being read. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.